in that moment, I remember it, like, it got shivers down my spines in a good way as I tell you the story. The tears just streamed down me, and I felt her love for me and also her desperation in her predicament from the wording of the letter. She was clearly in a very low place.
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I, Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members. I'm Damon Davis, and you're about to hear from Simon. He called me from the United Kingdom. Simon knew he was adopted from as early as he can remember. When he finally decided to search for his birth mother, he had a flash of anger about the toy the woman left him. But when he learned of her situation and heard another birth mother's perspective that his anger was likely misguided, he quickly changed course to empathizing with his birth mother. Listen to Simon's efforts to support other adoptees and his desire to change prevailing narratives in adoption. This is Simon's journey. Simon learned he was adopted before he was 2 years old. He said he had no challenges related to adoption growing up as a kid. The only story he told me was one of mild jealousy for his younger sister, who was adopted after himself. When the family of 3 went to pick up their new addition, the young lady was gifted a new blanket, but Simon didn't get one, and he was upset. Simon said people have asked him over the years whether he wanted to find his real mom and dad, but he always says his adoptive parents are his real parents. They're the ones who raised him, and he's attached to them. I asked Simon about similarities and differences between himself and his parents.
So my dad was the entrepreneur, breadwinner, business-focused guy, really kind of like very on that. And my mum was the more, traditional, nurturing type. We had ups and downs, I guess. I thought perhaps, my dad was very focused on the business side, as guys tend to be, and I became that as well. I still am that. Yeah, I'm a white guy adopted by white folks. So do I look like them? Not really, but not very dissimilar. I do remember a time when I was about maybe 14, 15. We were away. We were on holiday, and we were in a bar cafe during the day, playing pool at the back of the beach. This was in Malta. We used to go to Malta a lot. It's it's an island in the Mediterranean. So my dad went there on national service in the Royal Air Force, and we often went. He bought a flat over there, and we used to go every year. And anyway, an older bloke made eye contact with me and then my dad as we were standing around the pool table waiting for our turn to pool. And the guy said, "That's your dad, isn't it?" to me. And I kind of looked at my dad, and my dad kind of winked, I think, and I winked back at him. And we're about the same size. Well, my dad died about 4 years ago. We're about the same size, like 5'10", similar kind of build. Do we look like each other? Not really. Do we look dissimilar? Not really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, family-ish.
Family-ish.
Yeah, close enough. I'm with you 100%. We had the same sort of family makeup in my family. I'm sort of middle brown. My mom is light brown. My dad was dark brown. So we kind of looked like we were family. And if somebody asked, we would do the same thing. You kind of look at each other and smile and wink and say, yeah, that's my dad, So I'm with you. That's really cool. How about how you got along with your sister? This is another adoptee, and, so you're not entirely like your parents. And then you've got another person who comes from another family. How did you and your sister get along?
Good and bad, really. I'd had some fallings out with her, and we didn't fight much. We didn't go at each other hammer and tong or anything like that. She's quite different to me now. She's got a different outlook on life. She's got a different take on, like, me and my wife haven't got any kids. She's got 3 kids, so she lives a different lifestyle, and we're very different people. So I've really rushed headlong into self-awareness, that sort of stuff. And she's not like that.
Yeah, I understand. How about your mom? How'd you get along with your mom?
Yeah, mum's great. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I got on well with my mum. She's a very empathetic kind of person. So I sometimes tell the tale about I got knocked over. I ran in front of a very slow moving car. Right, it was just coming out of a junction when I was about 10, and I got knocked over. Just a little bruise, nothing bad. But when I got home, I told my mum what had happened, and she said, "Oh, you silly idiot," or something like that. And I thought, I didn't do it on purpose, So, and that sticks out for me, because that was one of the few occasions when I didn't feel that she was empathetic towards me. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was like, oh, that's a bit different. Obviously she was frustrated or worried, concerned that, getting myself into danger by not being aware of traffic, and, she's worried for me. But I thought, well, I didn't do it on purpose. So yeah, I'd say I've probably become closer to her since my dad died. I see more of her. I speak to her every day and just check in. She's not really into. She's in her 80s, so it's a slightly different generation. It's not a very. I don't know whether you've kind of got this vibe or not. So the British, and we're known for our stiff upper lip, right? So you're Americans. Mass generalization here,
sure.
Damon.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So, mass generalization.
I make it too, believe me.
Sorry?
I make these generalizations too, so please go ahead.
Yeah. And so, we are a little bit more reserved. We don't talk about our feelings as much. We didn't talk about adoption that much, very little. But it wasn't an issue. It didn't really need talking about.
Simon was adopted in Liverpool, but within the last 5 years or so, he got his original birth certificate, which showed he was born 30 miles away over the border in Wales. He said it wasn't a big deal when he learned that fact, just kind of interesting to put the pieces together. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Simon has already said he didn't really have questions about his adoption. So I was curious to know what may have happened to make him realize what adoption truly meant in the formulation of his family, and what was the catalyst for his search.
So the catalyst for the search was sitting in a therapist's office, having the bejesus scared out of me by the idea of my birth mother rejecting me again.
But where did that come? How did you get to that point? Take me back before you went to therapy.
Yeah.
How did you get to that point?
So I hit 40, right, 2007. And I found out that my teddy bear, the teddy bear I'd had from birth, had been given to me by my birth mother. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that I didn't know that it was from her. And my first reaction was one of curiosity. And then telling somebody about it a couple of months later, I had a volcano of anger came out of me. I was going through a tough time business-wise. So I was at a low ebb. And when I was at that low ebb, I can see this now, I couldn't see it at the time. So what I said was my birth, there was lots of profanity, which I won't share because it's a family show. My birth mother didn't, and there was a lot of venom behind my words. So I'm just repeating the very matter of fact to you now. But so she didn't love me enough to keep me. This teddy bear is just a consolation prize. She gave me this effing consolation prize of the teddy bear. Yeah. And the lady that I was with said, well, I'm a mum myself, as you know, and I don't think it was quite like that, Simon. And with that, the volcano ceased erupting straight away. So I had a very intense anger towards my birth mother. I'd never really thought about my birth mother. Well, not never really. I'd never thought about my birth mother. I'd never thought about her in a bad way. I'd never felt like this to her. But that's how I felt in that moment. And so I thought maybe I had an issue to look at. Yeah. And also, but the bigger issue really was for me was business. So I'd been working towards business, been trying to make my business a success for quite a while. And when I finally got there, it was short-lived, but it was a hollow victory. Right? It didn't mean anything to me. So the meaning that the thing that was going through, and this was all around about the same time within a year. So I thought that, basically business success hasn't made me happy, and adoption has made me sad, insecure, low self-esteem, whatever, not good enough. That's it. But so that kind of set me off on a journey. So it's either a midlife crisis or a spiritual journey, or doing the work, depending, self-discovery, whichever you want to say. So I learned a lot of stuff, and I felt a lot better in myself. And a few years later, I read the
Before you get to the Primal Wound, I want you to just take me back for a moment, because you kind of glossed over what the therapist said to you.
This was later on. This was later on.
Okay, gotcha. So let's recap for a quick moment. Then you have been trying for a while to reach business success.
A long time.
And it sounds like as a result of that attempt, your emotions were heightened as you were in this lower point of not having reached that success. And so it sounds like you were really in a place of self-examination in general. What am I as a businessman? What am I as a man? What am I as a person, a human here? And that self-examination, it sounds like, involved also thoughts about your own self-worth, and as a result, your thoughts about your biological mother. Like, this was not a thought process you'd had before, but it sounds like this all bubbled up at the same time. Is that roughly correct?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
And it sounds like also then you had this teddy bear that you had been cherishing for a while, but then as you sort of got into this darker place of self-examination, you thought to yourself, this is just a piece of crap. Like, this was just a farewell gift, and it doesn't really mean anything to me in that moment.
Not quite. All my animosity was turned in that split, like 5 seconds, was turned towards my birth mother.
Sure.
Not the bear. So
gotcha. So this is all preceding this sit down with this therapist. So in between,
that's like what years before.
Yeah. So that you've had this moment of self-reflection that turned into a dark place. And then it sounds like you said you read the Primal Wound. What happened then? So tell me about reading the Primal Wound and what that meant to you.
So I want to just take the timeline back. Yeah. So sure. I was 40 when I found out the teddy bear was from her birth mum. I hit the business success when I was 41, and it didn't, and it was a hollow victory. I started searching. I started looking for myself probably, around that time. I did a lot of work and learned a lot of stuff and was a lot better in myself. So my life went from a 7 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10. 8 years later, I read The Primal Wound, and that took me back a step. That took me down again. So my life had gone from a 7 to a 9. It probably went to like an 8. And so I was looking to heal the primal wound until I realized that I wasn't actually wounded. And then that took my life to a 9.5.
Wow. That's fascinating. What was it that made you realize that you weren't wounded?
Well, it's because of it's because of who we truly are, right? So there's a French guy. I use this quote all the time. I should learn how to pronounce his name. I did French at school for like 8 years, Damon, so I should know this. But
yeah, you should know how to pronounce this guy.
It's called Pierre Dujardin or something. Pierre Dujardin. So let's just call him Pierre, right? Okay. He says that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. Spiritual beings having a human experience. So the feelings of insecurity, all people have, obviously, as adoptees, tend to have a little bit more, perhaps. The thought that I'm good enough, which I know that pretty much everybody has as well, whether we're adopted or not. That's all in the human experience. And we're fixated by that human experience. And life is a contact sport. So that's where all the tricky stuff is. That's where all the trauma is. And that's where we're focused, because it's really loud. We're really bought in. We're really invested in our thoughts and our feelings. And we don't really pay a lot of attention to the spiritual essence of who we are, the spiritual being. The spiritual being, spirit, is the opposite of material, right? Spiritual is the opposite of material, I think. It's one way of looking at it. So spirit isn't a thing. And because it's not a thing, it can't be wounded. So if you try and get a knife and stab air, you can't stab air because there's nothing there. There's nothing for it to land. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. What I think I've heard you say is basically, because your spirit is a non-tangible object, you can't actually hurt it physically.
You can't wound it.
Yeah. Especially with something, as physically detaching as adoption. I hear you. That's really fascinating. That's an interesting way to look at it.
So to me, there's a difference between kind of like a neat concept and a deep knowing. So I've expressed this in a kind of logical, different but logical, a neat little soundbite. But I get this in my soul, deep, man. Like, as I'm saying this now and I'm slowing down, I can feel it. I've got an embodied understanding of this. So this thing that every single person on the planet, every single adoptee, we are fundamentally unwoundable.
I like that. I wonder, though.
But we will feel wounded.
Oh, yeah. That was exactly what I was going to get to. So what is it then that adoptees feel when they, suffer? We suffer, mentally, among other suffering that may be inflicted upon us physically. But what do you think it is then that so many adoptees are feeling?
A disconnection with ourselves.
Mm-hmm. How do you help folks reconnect then? What do you suggest to people?
Look within. You've got to see it for yourself. We have to see it for ourselves. I came up with something really cool to explain this. A couple of years ago, I was talking to one of my wife's friends. She's not adopted, right? But I said to her, there's no such thing as a secondhand epiphany.
Oh, that's interesting.
We've got to have them for ourselves. So for me, there's no such thing as a secondhand insight. There's no such thing as a secondhand aha moment. There's no such thing as a secondhand new idea. You've got to see it for yourself. And this isn't one of my metaphors. This is one from a mentor of mine. He says that we're all born perfect, like a brilliant, priceless diamond. And then we go through life and poop happens to us. Mm-hmm. Such as for us, we get relinquished. Other people, and people go through extreme poop. So the most important mentor in my life, she was raped by her dad. She was sexually abused by her dad, right? So poop happens. We feel like poop. We have poopy thoughts. And over time, we get that the diamond is obscured in layers and layers and layers of poop. And we lose sight of the perfection that we are. And as adoptees, we've got a really good reason to believe that we are poop because we weren't good enough. This is sacred stuff, Mothers giving away babies. There's got to be something wrong with me. Yeah, I've got to be poop. So the disconnection with ourselves is losing sight of the diamond. It is focusing on the human experience rather than the spiritual being that we are. So I'm trying to connect the dots on the different things that I'm talking about. So is this
No.
making any
Yeah, no, it makes
sense?
absolute sense. Yeah, for sure. It's fascinating, and I can appreciate where you're coming from in terms of having done this introspection to think these things through, absorb what mentors have told you, and sort of synthesize it into your own understanding of what this means for both you and for, the human experience. This is fascinating to hear how you've arrived at this stuff.
I do a lot of work on this stuff, my friend.
So let's go back sort of into your story for a moment. I do want to hear about the therapy session where you're having the bejesus scared out of you by this therapist, and this person basically talks you down from your thoughts about what this teddy bear means to you. So can you explain how that session went and what this therapist said to you that changed your mind?
Yeah. So the teddy bear tale is when I was 40.
Sure. Okay.
The therapist session is 8 years later.
I see.
After reading the Primal Wound and believing that I'm wounded and therefore needing to heal, before I've got to the realization that I'm talking about now. Mm-hmm. So I'm sat in the therapist chair. I had about 6 months before that session, I'd got my original birth certificate with my birth mother's name on it. And I had not gone any further. I'd not decided to search her out. So I'm talking to the therapist, presumably about the birth search, because this is 6 years ago now, right? She's asking me about why I've not searched. And then the idea of her, Pat, being outside the therapist's room pops into my head. And I imagine myself opening the door and her rejecting me again. And so I get angry, then I get scared, then I get very determined that I'm not going to let this fear ruin my life, harm me, hold me back. And I decided in that moment to resume the search.
In the UK, Simon had to engage an intermediary who initiated a search for his adoption file. When he received it, Simon found letters from his birth mother to the agency about planning to place him. There were notes from his social worker documenting the process and what his birth mother conveyed about her situation. At the time of her pregnancy, she was going out with a guy for 5 months, told him she was pregnant, and he told her he didn't want anything to do with the child. His birth mother made the decision to place Simon via adoption. In the documents was a unique letter.
Then there's this letter from her to the agency 4 days after she has handed me over at the adoption agency council, saying that she had wanted me to have something from her. She'd wanted to stop on the way to the agency and buy a teddy bear to give me, but the traffic was bad and she didn't want to be late. Would the woman that runs the council, the agency, the social worker, would she contact my parents and ask them if they would accept a teddy bear from her if she was to buy one? And in that moment, I remember it like it got shivers down my spines in a good way as I tell you the story. The tears just streamed down me, and I felt her love for me and also her desperation in her predicament from the wording of the letter. She was clearly in a very low place. Some of the wording was very, it was very disempowered. It was clearly, it was begging. It was almost begging. And I saw the 8 years previously, for 5 seconds, I had said, my mother, she didn't love me enough to keep me. What sort of effing consolation prize is this teddy bear when she wouldn't love me? Something like that. She didn't love me enough to keep me. 8 years later, reading this letter that she never thought I would see, like you were so far off their side. That was pure fiction. You made up that horror story. You made up that horror story for 5 seconds. And Sarah, the lady that said, I don't think it was quite like that, was 1,000% true.
Yeah.
1,000%.
This is one of the challenges that we have inside of our own heads, the narrative that we create as to what has transpired, why it transpired, how the person felt about us when it happened. And you can't help it because your brain doesn't have anything to go on. So you create something to attach to. And some people create fantasies that are, fairy tales and rainbows and are positive. And others create narratives that are more negative. And it can depend on where you are in your life. As you've indicated, you were in a place that already had some self-worth questioning happening already. And so to be in contemplation of yourself as an adoptee at the same time, you could see how you couldn't necessarily create the rainbows scenario at a time when you were also feeling not so hot about business success or the hollowness of it or what have you. So it's interesting to hear how your mentality evolved over those 8 years into recognizing, especially by view of the letter, recognizing where she was, what she was saying, how she felt, and interpreting it from the words she used and extracting her disempowerment from the content of the letter. It's really interesting.
I think that's a great summation of it.
Simon enlisted a freelance researcher, not an adoption search angel, to help look for his birth mother. As they searched for clues, they found a notice of a woman's death on a church website. Her name was Patricia, Simon's birth mother's name from his original birth certificate. The note of remembrance about Patricia was written by a second woman named Beverly. Simon wrote a letter to Beverly to introduce himself and to try to learn more. He didn't get any reply.
And then I got a letter from about 9 months later. I got a letter from Canada, and it said that it was from another guy. I probably won't mention his name, and he said that he said that I was right. Patricia was my birth mother, and unfortunately she died 2005, I think. I can't remember exactly, but a long time before I ever went searching.
What year was your search, roughly?
My search was probably 2015-ish.
So roughly 10 years prior. And what was this gentleman's relation to your biological mother that he would...
She was he was her brother.
I see. So if I'm hearing...
And he'd gone to Beverly's house to clear the house after she died and found a letter. So there was 3 siblings: Patricia, my birth mother, Beverly, her sister, and this other guy whose name I'm not going to say.
I see. So your mother passed in 2005. Her sister places a eulogy or some sort of death announcement on a church website, which
something like that.
Later found with a person who, a volunteer searcher.
Yeah.
And you reach out to the author of that notice.
Correct.
Who was your birth mother's sister.
Correct.
And you didn't hear anything back from that woman.
Because she died.
Oh, the sister of your birth mother.
The sister had died as well. The sister, both sisters had died. Sorry.
I see. So this third individual was the 2 deceased sisters' brother. He had now gone to her house
to clear
clearing out the second sister, your aunt. He was clearing her home and found your letter.
Bingo.
I got you. And then he wrote back to you in response to the letter that you had written to your birth aunt. Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. Wow. How long, if you don't mind me, just for clarity.
Yeah, sure.
How long was the time period between when you wrote your letter to your biological aunt and the response that came from your biological uncle? Roughly.
I think it was about 9 months. It could have been 6 months. It could have been 15. But
So more a yearish. And did you, in that time, think man, she didn't write me back. I should write her another letter, or I should try to call, or like what else happened in your search?
No, I didn't. I wasn't. I know I wasn't going to do anything else. For me, I'd done a lot of, as I've explained, I've done a lot of healing and work, and that has been mainly in internal, and there's not a lot really. The letter is very easy, an easy thing for people to grasp, and people say, well, it's all about the letter. Well, my self-discovery had a number of chapters. The letter is a big obvious chapter. I was pretty much I was at peace by then.
Writing the letter had been
so the letter and the connection and the love that I'd felt my birth mother's love for me in a letter that she'd written 48 years before. It was visceral. It was a visceral experience, her love. So search for her was not potent. It wasn't. It was like, it wasn't, I gotta find her or else, it was just like, well, I've come this far. Let's go. Let's keep going. And then when they didn't get a response right, I thought, well, maybe she wasn't the right person, or, I didn't have any other avenues, but I wasn't particularly bothered. And I'm a really persistent guy. So if I'm not being persistent, then I know I'm not really bothered. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when something matters to me,
yes.
I'm a dog with a bone, right? So I'm a dog with a bone, and that this search was not a bone.
Sure. Do you remember having any feelings at all when you read this announcement of your birth mother's passing?
No, I can't, because I wasn't sure it was her, really. So, and then when I found out that I was like, that's sad, but I wasn't. I didn't have the kind of the emotional reaction that I had when I read the letter. The letter was the letter was massive, but there have been a series of massive things. But me telling you about those massive things, they don't, just doesn't mean anything. It's just like a change that's happened in my head.
Sure. I wondered about Simon's search for his birth father. At the time we spoke, Simon had written to a guy that he thought could be the man, but Simon made sure I knew that the search was never about finding this guy.
I think because for 40 years, I'd never had an issue with my birth mum. And then I did. And okay, I did some jiggling around and did some research and but there is one thing that, from the letter, well, clearly he didn't want anything to do with the baby before it was me, so not like, you didn't bloody want me, no, I'm not going to, not like that, but it's just like, well, and also the other thing was, Damon, it was like, well, I wonder what I would have done. I don't think I would have been like him, but who knows? I mean, one other thing was, like, abortion wasn't legalized in the UK till 1967, and I was born on the 4th of January 1967. So when I was conceived, abortion wasn't lawful, so she didn't have an option. She didn't have that option. But I wondered, because, what would I have done if I'd got I can think of girls, if I'd got a girl pregnant, I can think of, like, relationships I've had. What would I have done?
Yeah. It's impossible to contemplate. It really is. Because you never know until you can't predict what situation you are in at the moment that you hear that, a woman you're with is pregnant. You can't predict sort of what kind of person you were in that moment. So life situation as well as your own sort of maturity and advancement. There's so many factors that determine how a person makes a decision in a situation, for better or for worse. We all would like to think we would make the best possible, most positive, mature decision ever. And it's just not so in certain situations. And we can all look back in our lives and acknowledge that we made some poor choices, and And that was a result of immaturity, among other things, lack of experience, what have you. So it's impossible to try to predict that stuff. Simon works to support other adoptees in the UK. He runs a podcast called Thriving Adoptees, where he brings together members of the adoption constellation. We chatted a bit about his work and our perspectives on the prevailing adoption narratives.
It's sharing different perspectives to help other people on their, hopefully help people on their learning stroke healing journeys. And I'm also doing some, I'm doing some speaking on this as well. The thing for me is that there's this trauma obsession and there's this primal wound obsession. And as I've already said, I believe that we're fundamentally unwoundable. I'm not trying to change that because I think that the two dominant narratives are completely wrong. Both the rainbow and unicorn one and the all adoptees are primarily wounded one. I think that both of those are completely wrong.
I agree. But I also think we have to acknowledge that everybody comes from different places of different strength and endurance, right? Mentally, physically, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And there are people who are not able to sort of separate themselves from their experiences. And it could be adoption, it could be other things. And it makes it incredibly difficult to carry on when you continue carrying the burden of experiences that have happened to you in the past. I think there's an important growth process in turning, facing what has happened to you in the past, acknowledging it, dealing with it, and then carrying on with yourself as a person, continuing to grow. And I'm always fearful for those who carry trauma when I feel like it should be something that you can acknowledge but not like carry right in front with you. Do you know what I'm saying? It's part of your history, but I want people to be able to sort of acknowledge it and continue to grow and move forward. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done by folks to get to that place. Does what I said make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. Like, so the truth is, Damon, I've had an easy ride, pal. I've had an easy ride, and I kind of know that. But as I said earlier on, my most important mentor, Liz, she had the toughest thing. I mean, if you being sexually abused by your dad, if you're going to play some sort of sick game of who's had its toughest, that's got to be pretty close to the top. That's got to be a winning hand. If she can come through that, she wanted. I say this sometimes on my podcast because I'm aware that I've had it easy. So she's the proof that people that are dealt far tougher hands can come through it.
Yep.
And she wanted to be adopted because she's being abused in every way possible by her dad, and her dad was also abusing a mum, and just like, if she can get through that, and she had her stuff, but then she had the the aha moment, the epiphany moment there, and now inspires other people, including me. So I put a note on a post on a adoptee Facebook group, and I said, adoption is something that happened to us. It doesn't define us. And I got like 120 likes, 30 loves, and 10 vitriolic how dare yous. So everybody's at a different point. Everybody's got a different story, but we aren't our story. And I think for me, you were talking about this earlier on, and I heard a really great way of summing this up. I heard it from somebody else. We think the voice in our head is CNN when really it's the Comedy Channel.
That's a good one. That's pretty funny. It's not factual. It's made up, and it could come with a disclaimer for entertainment purposes only, right?
Yeah.
Because until you get facts for the things that happened to you, you're creating a fictional story. So I'm with you 100%. Wow. Well, Simon, thank you so much for taking time, man. This has been really fascinating to hear your story and your journey of self-growth. I think that is the powerful piece that I take from what you've said today, is that you've really done some introspection to figure out sort of who you are physically, spiritually, mentally. And I'm glad that you're helping other adoptees through their own journeys. That's really awesome. Well done.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to bring adoptive parents on this as well, because they are being fed the trauma obsession as well. They're being fed, and it's putting them off. It's putting them off. And I continue to do the introspection stuff. I consume audios and podcasts a couple of hours a day when I'm walking the dog and when I'm driving in the car. I know that I know that I still listen to that voice in my head and think it's the A&M sometimes, like a lot of the time. So I'm not the finished article.
Work in progress.
Work in progress.
I love it, man. Thanks so much for being with me today, Simon. I appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, take care. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, it's me. Simon admitted he's had it easy, but he said that from a place of a lot of introspection and working on himself. You heard Simon say that he had been to therapy. He has mentors who've also been through adversity, and he shared how much he spent time working on himself, listening to podcasts and thinking about his feelings. I loved hearing the story of the teddy bear that he had as a kid but didn't realize its significance. Tried to hate the toy for the consolation prize he perceived it to be, then came to cherish it once he read his birth mother's letter expressing her desperate situation. This is the challenge of adopted people who live with no facts about our origin. We're forced to create false narratives that lead us to unfounded anger, and sometimes, when we find the truth, it can be such a relief to understand why we were placed for adoption and realize how wrong our false assumptions were. It doesn't always work out that way, but for Simon, it did. Take a moment to find the Adoptees Thriving podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and look out for Simon's work bringing adoptees together in support of one another. I'm Damon Davis, and I hope you found something in Simon's journey that inspired you, validates your feelings about wanting to search, or motivates you to have the strength along your journey to learn, who am I, really? If you would like to share your adoption journey and your attempt to connect with your biological family, please visit whoamireally.podcast.com/share. You can follow the show at facebook.com/WAIReally. If the show is meaningful to you, you can support me with a contribution to keep it going on patreon.com/WAIReally. Please subscribe to Who Am I Really on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. It would mean so much to me if you took a moment to leave a 5-star rating there. Those ratings can help others to find the podcast too. And you can check out the story of my adoption journey, Who Am I Really? An Adoptee Memoir, on Amazon.com. I hope you'll add my story to your reading list.